Gary Lineker is back on the BBC, but what's the final score? The presenters, supporters and critics must now wait until the corporation carries out a review into who is allowed to say what on social media.
Right. What do we want? Patience. When do we want it? Now.
Also this lunchtime, Strike UK. Junior doctors walk out for 3 days. How will this dispute be resolved?
This was not an easy decision. This is our last resort.
35% as a demand is not affordable.
A major incident declared in Swansea after a huge gas explosion destroys a house. And Oscar Glory, the history-making Asian actor who has nearly won everything, everywhere.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. Gary Lineker is back, but is he back for good? He'll present Match of the Day on Saturday. The boss of the BBC has apologised to viewers for so much sport being off air this weekend. But this lunchtime, we are no clearer in knowing what the BBC's big stars are allowed and not allowed to say on social media. That is going to be reviewed. A move seemingly welcomed by all involved in the past 48 hours in the row over impartiality. The Director General, Tim Davie, says Lineker will abide by the editorial guidelines until a review of the BBC's social media policy is complete. So until then, is Gary gagged? Well, he tweeted today, however difficult the last few days have been, it simply doesn't compare to having to flee your home from persecution or war. Martha Fairley has the latest.
What are we doing?
Leaving home this morning, Gary Lineker refused to comment over his reinstatement as Match of the Day presenter.
I've already said what I'm going to say on Twitter. If I say anything more now, it just encourages people to doorstep me. Well, we're finishing.
Directing reporters to his Twitter feed, where he'd announced he and the BBC have found a way forward over the impartiality row. This morning he wrote, "After a surreal few days, I'm delighted that we've navigated a way through this. I want to thank you all for the incredible support, particularly my colleagues at BBC Sport, for the remarkable show of solidarity."
Sorry we're unable to show our normal Match of the Day too.
The BBC was forced to broadcast limited football coverage with no commentary or analysis at the weekend after Lineker was taken off air for tweeting his views on the government's launch of a new asylum seeker policy. Fellow pundits walked out in support of him, throwing sports programmes into chaos. But the corporation's now agreed with Lineker he will follow editorial guidelines while a policy review takes place.
I think I've acted in the right way through this. It's always been difficult. As everyone's been saying on this affair, there's been no easy answers. It's been tough to get the balance right. But asking Gary Lineker to step aside, I think, was appropriate at that moment. Then we reset and we do the things we've laid out in this agreement, which I think are right, and we go forward.
Clearly, the social media guidelines need looking at, but I do think this whole episode raises some much bigger questions about the relationship between the BBC, that's supposed to be impartial and independent, and with the government.
Following the agreement, Gary Lineker tweeted, "A final thought, however difficult the last few days have been, it simply doesn't compare to having to flee your home from persecution or war to seek refuge in a land far away. It's heartwarming to have seen the empathy towards their plight from so many of you." And he says he can't wait to get back into the Match of the Day chair on Saturday. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
So where does the Gary Lineker saga leave the BBC in terms of reputation? And will its bosses, the Director General Tim Davie and the Chair Richard Sharp, both survive? Both have faced calls to resign. This lunchtime, Downing Street declined to say whether the Prime Minister backed either of the men. Neil Connery is at the BBC headquarters for us this lunchtime, and our political correspondent Harry Horton joins us from Westminster. To Neil first, an agreement for now, but how much damage has this caused?
Nina, I think the immediate fire has been put out, but there are plenty of embers that remain alight in all of this. This has been a disaster for the BBC, and the damage, I think, is clear for many people to see. Big questions facing senior figures at the corporation this lunchtime about the way this has been handled. For instance, I think if what had been announced this morning clearly had been announced back on Friday, what a different weekend we would have had in terms of the disruption to the sports coverage. I think then the questions facing Tim Davie really are starting to grow because of the way he has handled this. Gary Lineker has made it clear that he felt there was pressure last week coming from some Conservative MPs, from ministers as well, as we saw on Twitter, about the tweets that he had posted. There was a perception some people had that the corporation came under political pressure from those MPs and ministers, and that was behind the decision to ask Lineker to step back from Match of the Day. That is something the Director General Tim Davie has made absolutely clear this morning did not happen last week. The problem, of course, for the BBC is that at its bedrock is impartiality and independence. And when they are perceived to have been weakened, which is what has happened here, that can only damage the corporation's reputation.
Neil, thank you very much. Questions to this lunchtime for the BBC chair. Harry, why are people calling on him, Richard Sharp, to resign?
Yeah, well, Richard Sharp at the moment is under investigation over whether he properly disclosed his role in facilitating an £800,000 loan to the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Now, Richard Sharp has denied any involvement in arranging that loan, but a committee of MPs has already criticised him for not disclosing any details before them last year. Now, the BBC's been accused of double standards over the weekend. Of course, Gary Lineker was suspended over his tweets, but no action was taken over the BBC chair, Richard Sharp, who remains under investigation and who many have accused of having too close ties to the Conservative Party. Now, the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, today said that Richard Sharp's position is increasingly untenable. The Liberal Democrats have also called for him to stand down. The Prime Minister has refused to back Richard Sharp as well. Rishi Sunak instead pointed to this investigation that's currently ongoing over his appointments. And as we've been hearing, as Neil said, Downing Street has also refused to say whether the Prime Minister backs the BBC Director General, Tim Davie. Now, when it comes to Gary Lineker, I've been speaking to some Conservative MPs this morning. I think many of them feel as though this whole row has been a bit of a distraction. But it should be said, some Conservative MPs feel as though the BBC has caved in here. And many of them today are calling on the government to scrap the BBC licence fee.
Harry Horton, thank you. Junior doctors across England have started their 3-day strike. NHS bosses are warning it'll be the most disruptive industrial action the NHS has seen in a winter beset by walkouts. The medics make up nearly half of the workforce. They're calling for a 35% pay rise. The government has called that unaffordable. But the doctors' union, the BMA, says doctors are leaving in their droves, patients are dying, and the government needs to listen. Here's our health correspondent, Martin Stew.
The walkout started at 7 this morning. It will last 3 straight days and impact the biggest sector of the medical workforce. A combination NHS England bosses say could trigger the most severe disruption in the health service's history.
Half the doctors in the country are on strike. It is inevitable, therefore, that there will be major disruptions to services. Now, whilst we are prioritising emergency care, intensive care, maternity services, as you'd expect, nearly all other services will be impacted.
Junior doctors say starting salaries are lower than a coffee shop worker, pushing them and the system to breaking point.
This was not an easy decision. This is our last resort. Patients aren't getting the care that they deserve now. To solve this crisis, we need to keep the doctors that we train and make medicine a valued profession.
More than 36,000 junior doctors voted in favour of strike action. That's 98% of those who cast votes. The BMA unions say they've seen a 26% pay cut in real terms since 2008. And now they want a 35% increase to balance things out. The government has made concessions to open talks with ambulance staff and nurses, but so far no progress with junior doctors.
35% as a demand is not affordable. We've offered to engage in constructive talks with the junior doctors. We stand ready to have those discussions, and I urge them to come and engage with us on that.
Consultants and senior nursing staff have been drafted in to provide emergency care, but tens of thousands of outpatient appointments are being cancelled. Blood flow to John Carroll's feet is so bad he may lose a toe if he doesn't have surgery soon. He's already waited 2 years. Now tomorrow's operation has been called off.
I know that if I lose my toes, my balance is going to be gone. I just feel so let down because you can't turn to anybody.
John's not yet been told when his operation will now be. The strike ends at 7 a.m. on Thursday morning, but the backlog will last far longer.
Any chance it'll be called off before then? And if not, what disruption are we likely to see?
Well, the government did offer talks late on Friday night based around similar terms those they offered to the nurses and ambulance staff, but the union weren't willing to take those terms, so it looks like the strike is on for the next 3 days. As for disruption, people like John, terrible. I mean, tens of thousands of appointments cancelled. If it's not urgent, it will be considered for cancellation pretty much. That includes some cancer services, we understand. The good news is, though, the NHS, because there's been so much disruption over the winter, have got pretty good at getting their house in order to try and fight fires and respond. So if you have an emergency, the systems are still running. So call 999 as you would as usual. GPs are still there. So day to day, things are OK. But in the long term, will continue to have a knock-on impact.
Martin, thank you. Rishi Sunak has pledged an extra £5 billion in funding for the British military over the next 2 years. The Prime Minister acknowledged the growing threat of China and Russia, saying his #1 priority is to keep the country safe. He made the announcement ahead of a meeting of the AUKUS alliance, which is made up of the UK, Australia and the United States.
It's clear that the world has become more volatile, the threats to our security have increased, and that's why we're investing £5 billion more in our world-beating armed forces over the next 2 years and increasing our defence spending to 2.5% of GDP so we can continue to be a world leader when it comes to defence and keep our country safe.
Our political editor Robert Peston is travelling with the Prime Minister and sent this from San Diego.
Behind me is a symbol of America's military might from the Vietnam War era, the USS Midway. Here in San Diego, the American President Joe Biden is meeting with Britain's Rishi Sunak and the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, to confront the threats of today, and in particular the perceived threat from the second most powerful economy in the world, China, the most populous country in the world. And the biggest thing that they're going to announce today is a deal to transfer precious technology, nuclear technology, from America and Britain to Australia in the form of the know-how for making nuclear-powered submarines. And indeed, there will also be a deal for those submarines to be made in Britain and America. As it happens, there will also be an incredibly significant defence military announcement in the UK when James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, stands up and announces a 50% rise in resources for the Ministry of Defence, for the military, over the long term, an increase from 2% of national income in what we spend on our defence to 2.5%. Now, there's no precise date on reaching that 2.5%, but we will go up from 2% to 2.25% by 2025. That's a £5 billion increase. Much of that money will go again on increasing the UK's nuclear capability, but also on making good again the stocks of ammunition that have been massively run down by the war in Ukraine. So, both here in America and in Britain, an enormously important day for the security of the United Kingdom.
Robert Peston reporting from America there to a breaking story now. And emergency services are responding to what they're calling a major incident in Swansea following a suspected gas explosion. Our reporter Ian Woods has been following this and is with me now. What more do we know at this early stage?
Well, we're still gathering details, but this major incident was declared by the emergency services at around 11:20, so just over 2 hours ago. It happened in the town of Morriston, near Swansea, at the junction of Field Close and Clodagh Road. You can see from the pictures that we've already had in that not only were 2 houses completely destroyed, but many others in the street are damaged, windows shattered, debris everywhere, reports of tiles being blown up into the air. These were pictures in the immediate aftermath now, and before obviously the emergency services arrived on the scene. Now people are being asked to stay away while they do their work. You can just see the first firefighters arriving there. Now the leader of Swansea Council, Ron Stewart, has tweeted to say that it's not known at this time whether there are any injuries or fatalities. They said they were still trying to establish if everyone is safe. Since then, I've seen unconfirmed reports that 2 people were brought out of one house. Now, it's been described as a suspected gas explosion. Too early, obviously, to absolutely confirm that. But we've seen incidents in the past which have been gas explosions, which are heard some distance away. And usually the protocol is that people are being asked to stay away from their homes until the gas engineers can get there and make sure that there's no risk of another blast.
Ian Woods, thank you for that update. Thank you. The type of goods used to calculate the rate of inflation is changing. E-bikes, frozen berries and security cameras have all been added to the list, while Alcopops, digital compact cameras and non-top 40 CDs have all been dropped from the annual list. And voting in the contest to succeed Nicola Sturgeon as SNP leader has begun. MSPs Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan are all in the running for the job to become Scotland's next First Minister. The results will be announced after the ballot closes 2 weeks today. To the Oscars now, and the night belonged to one film and one woman. The star Michelle Yeoh, who missed out on a BAFTA, triumphed in Hollywood, becoming the first Asian woman to win an Oscar for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. The multiverse adventure film won pretty much everything else too. With that and some of the other highlights, here's our arts editor, Nina Nana.
It would have been hard to start the 95th Oscars without a reference to the infamous slap in the 94th. And so host Jimmy Kimmel obliged.
The Academy has a crisis team in place. If anything unpredictable or violent happens during the ceremony, just do what you did last year. Nothing.
An Irish goodbye.
But something unexpected did happen in the end. After the team behind An Irish Goodbye took to the stage to collect the award for Best Live Action Short, director Tom Barkley had a surprise for one of its stars.
This award is actually the second most important thing about today because it's this man's birthday. We'd love to use the rest of our time up here to sing for James. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear James. Happy birthday to you.
Just amazing how, not just winning an Oscar, but especially on my birthday. Fantastic. It's nice to take this Oscar back to Starbucks and Trauma and Mancap and the Down syndrome. So, can't believe it.
There were 7 Oscars for the sci-fi comedy Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, including an historic win for Michelle Yeoh, the first Asian woman to win Best Actress.
For all the little boys and girls who look like me watching tonight, this is a beacon of hope.
Everything, everywhere.
And a special moment as Ke Huy Quan, the winner of Best Supporting Actor, was reunited with Harrison Ford on stage 4 decades after they'd starred together in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And a history-making win for India, its first Oscar for Original Song, seeing off competition from the likes of Rihanna and Lady Gaga.
In the end, a night of firsts, of comebacks, of crowd-pleasing wins, and a birthday celebration. The 31-year-old
he's never going to forget.
She is handsome, she is pretty, she's the belle of Belfast City.
Nina Nannar, ITV News in Los Angeles.
Staying with the Academy Awards and the joy they're bringing to Altrincham. Pinocchio won Best Animation Movie, but it was a studio in Greater Manchester pulling the strings, as Sally Biddulph explains.
And the Oscar goes to Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio.
First a Golden Globe, then a BAFTA, and now an Oscar for the puppet that thinks he's a boy.
Animation is ready to be taken to the next step. We are all ready for it. Please help us.
And an animation studio in Greater Manchester is doing just that. McKinnon and Saunders in Altrincham are the puppet powerhouse behind the now Oscar-winning Best Animated Feature Pinocchio, and they're taking it all in their stride.
We first got involved in 2008 with the project, and it's been a long time, 15 years coming. We didn't dream at all that it would ever get an Oscar, but it's fantastic that it has done. It's surreal for sure.
Papa! It speaks!
He's just a puppet.
No, I'm not. I'm a real boy.
All of the characters were painstakingly carved, engineered, painted and dressed by the workshop. And when it came to awards season, there was a special request for bespoke tailoring for Geppetto and his son.
Netflix said, oh no, we do want a tuxedo. It would be wrong to put Pinocchio in one because he doesn't wear clothes anyway, but he'd just have the bow tie. And then I had to make him a little lint roller just because he's going to the Oscars. And that fabric, the black fabric, picks up every bit of fluff going.
From carpenter to red carpet, this dark reimagining of the classic children's story has produced the biggest fairy tale ending for its filmmakers. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
Fabulous stuff. Mary's here at 6:30 from me. Bye-bye.